Welcome back to the series on the solutions to the free LawPrep. We've been looking at some problems in the logical reasoning section. We've seen that the key to solving logical reasoning questions is to understand the structure of an argument. In this particular video, we will be seeing the role of various sentences that you'd find in the passage that is given to you. Now you'd find that maybe the role of the sentence could be a premise, maybe it's the conclusion, maybe it's an evidence, or maybe it's something else. Let us now look at the questions that follow to understand as to what role is played by the various components of the passage that you see in your LSAT India problem.
I very strongly suggest with this question and all other questions in this video series that it is very important for you to first spend some time with the question before you look at the solutions. Okay? Let me give you two ways in which you can do that. Two ways in which you can spend some time, engage with the question before you look at the video solutions. The first is a method wherein you can take around even 15 to 20 minutes on a certain question, with the focus being on accuracy. So you really want to read it well, you want to understand the question well, understand the structure, and then try to find the right answer by giving it your best. So you're not looking at the time so much, you're looking at accuracy. You're trying to see whether you've understood everything or not. That is one approach. It helps you in many ways. In that you will read even the options in detail, you'll see the options, you will see the question statement, you'll read the essays, the argument of the essayist, everything, you do that in detail. Another efficient and effective method is that maybe you can give yourself not more than a minute, which means it's definitely less than a minute. Okay. Now in this approach, I'd like you to spend around 10 seconds first skimming through the entire problem. What you can do in 10 seconds skimming through the entire problem is that in a matter of just glancing through the entire problem, you would be able to see as to what it is about. Like you'll be acquainted with the problem. So 10 seconds before you started this, you knew nothing about the problem, but in 10 seconds you've kind of found out the important words. Like for example, you can see here electronic monitoring, employers, tool, okay. So you get an idea of what it is about. So you first spend the first 10 seconds acquainting yourself with the problem. Next, you take around 5 seconds, or again 10 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, seeing the requirement of the question statement. So what does the question actually require of you? So you try to spend some time on the question statement, okay, so that you know what is required. Next, you take not more than 30 seconds. So you take 30 seconds or less trying to find out the answer. Okay. Now in this method, obviously you're focusing a bit on speed, and you're also trying to see as to how good your intuition is, how sharp or how accurate your intuition is as far as these questions are concerned. Both of these methods have their own merits, and you could choose either one of these or a combination of these depending on the question. But the more important point is that you definitely should do one of these, because when you now approach the question, you have an anticipation for certain option being right or wrong. Now when you have that anticipation, when you see the solution, it will make some sense to you, it will have some relevance, and also you'd be able to assimilate what I am telling you thereafter. If you simply watch this like a movie, the problem is that you don't know which input from me was important. You don't know what you didn't know, and the fruits of this entire exercise are not reaped to the fullest extent. Okay, so pause the video and try the question by yourself, and then we'll go for it together. Let's solve this together now and begin with an understanding of what the question requires of you. The question statement reads: the statement that a tool could be misused figures in the essayist argument in which one of the following ways? So you can see a tool could be misused is here, and this definitely is that statement. So this sentence is that statement. The question is, what is the role of this statement in the argument of the essayist? So now you have to figure out as to what the argument of the essayist is, and then see as to what role is being played by this statement. Let's go ahead and look at it in some detail. In the questions on logical reasoning, our primary target in most questions is to understand the structure of the argument. And to understand the structure, a very good starting point is to identify the conclusion. Now we are accustomed, because of the text that we generally read, that the conclusion is generally at the end of the paragraph or the argument or the statement. But this is not necessarily the case in the problems that you get in the LSAT India. There are some ways in which you can identify a conclusion. Sometimes you will find them preceded by words like thus, therefore, so, clearly, etc. At other times, you will find that a conclusion is of the nature of an opinion, or like a prescription that it should be this way, it should not be that way, or it seems likely that it should be this way. So it's in the form of a prescription. Okay, you'd find that in most cases the conclusion will fit into one of these two. In this particular case, you might want to pause the video and see as to what you might identify as the conclusion. Okay, let me tell you what the conclusion is. The conclusion here is that should not be outlawed. As you can see, this is clearly pointing to an opinion. This is the opinion of the essayist. Okay, so what you know that all of these things are tools that are allowing the essayist to arrive at this conclusion. So they maybe act as premises, or maybe they are evidence for some premise, but you now know that this is the conclusion. Let us go ahead and look at this in a little more detail. So once again, let us remind ourselves what we are here for. We are to look at the role of this statement in the argument, and let us now look at the statements, the sentences in this one by one. The first sentence, electronic monitoring of employees should not be outlawed, which means that, okay, EM, electronic monitoring, should not be illegal. Okay. Next sentence, many employers find it a useful productivity tool. Okay, employers find EM useful. Third sentence, workers, fearing that employers will misuse it, denounce electronic monitoring. Now, I don't entirely know the meaning of the word denounce, and maybe you don't either, but let me tell you that is not going to matter. Let's just think that denounce is something like dislike or reject. You know, you can think of it as a simpler word and keep that meaning in your head, because you know that it's approximately the same. And that meaning should be pretty much enough for you to get the question right. So let's just say that fearing misuse, workers say no to electronic monitoring. Denounce is like saying no. Okay. And then we look at the sentence that we're looking at in greater detail. It says that a tool could be misused, however, is not a good reason to outlaw it, but only to regulate and control its use. So it says that, hey, if there's a fear or possibility of the misuse of something, let us say, for example, you have a knife. Okay, this is a knife. Now you can either use this to cut an apple, right? You can use it for this, or you can use it for more dangerous things. So do you ban a knife simply because it could be misused, or do you regulate and control its use? That's what is being said here. So it says here that fear or the possibility of misuse is not a good reason to outlaw. Instead, you should only regulate. So this is what we see here. We've understood the four sentences. Let us go ahead and see it in a little more detail in terms of the structure of the argument. So we study the structure of this by beginning with the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion being that electronic monitoring should not be outlawed, and this is the opinion of the essayist, as you can see here, because this is the essayist concluding this here. But you can see two perspectives in here as well. The first is from the employers, who find it useful because it helps them with productivity. On the other hand, you see the opposite of that from the workers, who fear that there could be misuse, and therefore they say that, hey, we do not want electronic monitoring. So they're kind of saying, hey, outlaw it. So they are going against the conclusion of the essayist. Now, why has this been put into the argument? That's one thing you can think of. And now we're looking at the line that we require to find the role of. So in this thing, what you can see here is that it says that the reason that is given by the workers is not a good reason. So the workers are saying, hey, we do not want electronic monitoring because it is bad. And this sentence here says that the reason given by the workers is not good. Okay, so it says that this should not be outlawed. So it's again supporting the main conclusion. So what you can see here is that it is giving you a reason that goes against the conclusion of the workers. Okay. Now the essayist is basically saying, hey, your reason, the reason that you've given here is not good. Having understood that the role of the last sentence is the essayist basically saying, hey, I see your point. I know you're saying that because of this reason, electronic monitoring is not good. But let me tell you, your reasoning is not good. Your reasoning is wrong. Your reasoning against my conclusion is bad. Having understood this, look at the options and try to pick the answer by yourself. It should be quite easy. Okay, I'm giving you the answer. There you go. It is cited as an inadequate basis for rejecting the essayist's main conclusion. So the reasoning, the basis is inadequate because he says that your argument against my conclusion is not strong enough. Okay, pause the video, try using the method we just learnt on this question, and then we'll go for it together. So like with the previous problem, what you're being asked here is that there's something given in here and you are to see as to what role it plays. So the question statement reads, the claim that the fracture shows signs of partial healing figures in the argument in which one of the following ways. So this is that line and you are to see in what way it features in this argument. So let us have a look at the argument and then let us see as to what role this plays, and then we go and pick the right answer. So let us now focus on the argument. So you have 4 sentences here in the argument that I have laid out for you quite clearly. When solving a logical reasoning question, start by trying to see the structure of the argument, and in this process begin by identifying the conclusion. Now, how do you identify the conclusion? You can look for certain words such as so, thus, therefore. What follows these is generally the conclusion. Now when you look at these 4 sentences here, you clearly see no such word. In such a scenario, you might want to look for the other indicator of the conclusion, which is that the conclusion generally presents to you an opinion. So when you see an opinion, that is likely to be the conclusion. When you see the 4 sentences here, where do you see an opinion? You can try it by yourself by pausing the video. Okay, let me tell you what it is. You can see the opinion in the first sentence because here it says the best explanation for Mozart's death is this. Now it's telling you what the author thinks. The author believes that this is the best, this is an opinion, and so you have the conclusion. Let us go ahead. So the first sentence, the conclusion, as we saw, is the best explanation for Mozart's death involves the recently detected fracture in his skull. Okay, so trying to understand this statement, it says the best explanation is the skull fracture. The best explanation for Mozart's death is the skull fracture, which means that, hey, there are many explanations for the death maybe, and so you have many of these. One of them is the skull fracture, and this explanation is the best. Okay, let's look at the second line. It says the crack, most likely the result of foul play, could have easily torn veins in his brain, allowing blood to leak into the cranium. Now you don't need to know anatomy, you don't need to know what the cranium is, but I think it's quite clear that the cranium must be something in the skull, near the skull, something like that. It's enough for you. It says when such cranial bleeding occurs. Again, just simplify it for yourself. You can just think of this as when such bleeding occurs. The LSAT India is not going to test you on your understanding of biology and human anatomy, right? So don't bother. Okay, it says when such bleeding occurs and the blood dries, many of the brain's faculties become damaged, commonly though not immediately, leading to death. So it says that when such bleeding occurs, the blood dries, then the brain becomes damaged, and this often, so commonly, leads to death, but not immediately. And then it says support for this explanation of Mozart's death lies in the fact that the fracture shows partial signs of healing. Now, when you see the structure of this argument, this 4th sentence gives you support for this explanation, which means that the 4th sentence basically serves as evidence for the explanation. Okay, and these two maybe give you the explanation. So the 2nd and 3rd sentence kind of give you the explanation. The first sentence tells you that this is the best explanation, and the fourth sentence gives you evidence for the explanation. Now, what I was doing here is that without really getting into the details of the sentences as such, without getting into the details of the content, I'm showing you as to how you should identify structure. Okay, let us go ahead and now see the content of this in some detail. All right, the first sentence says that the best explanation is the recently detected skull fracture. Okay, it says that the fracture could have easily torn veins, allowing blood to leak into the cranium. So the fracture resulted in blood going into the cranium. Then it says that when such bleeding plus drying happens, then there's damage and that leads to death, right? It happens often but not immediately. Okay, and then it said that there's support for this explanation lies in the fact that the fracture shows partial signs of healing. Now remind ourselves that this is the line that we were looking at. We were trying to see as to what the role of this sentence is. Okay, it says something is fractured. Okay, and then there's damage. Okay, once there's damage, there's death. Okay, now I want you to pay attention to this, that the healing, right, the partial healing that is spoken of in here has obviously happened after the damage and before the death, right? So first the fracture happens, and because the death is not immediate in such cases, the death is not immediate, therefore there is life in the body, right? And therefore there is partial healing after the damage but before the death. So we have an explanation of Mozart's death which says that, hey, there was a certain fracture that has happened to his head. Okay, after that fracture there has been bleeding, and since the death is not immediate, there's some time that passes, and after that there is death. Now the sentence here which says that signs of partial healing tells you that during this time there has been healing, right? Now you're trying to say that, hey, this explanation is the best, and this is evidence for this explanation, right? So what is it signaling to you? It is indicating to you that, hey, this explanation is right, because as you can see, there has been some healing, which means the bleeding and the fracture has definitely happened before the death. So the fracture has caused the death. Now when you look at option B, which is the right answer, you see that in here. It says it shows that the fracture did not occur after Mozart's death. Because you see, if the fracture had happened after Mozart's death, then obviously he's not died because of the fracture. So for example, let's say this is a corpse, okay, and it's a bad diagram of a corpse. Let's say this is a dead person, okay. Now you know that this dead person has maybe ligature marks on the neck. So you kind of, ligature is like a rope or something. So he has ligature marks on the throat. Maybe he also has some signs of injury on the head. Now if you want to know as to what the cause of death was, obviously you're looking for what happened before the death, because something that's done after death cannot be the cause of a person's death, right? So B is the answer.
I assume that you've paused the video and tried solving the question yourself first, and now we will proceed to solving this together. Now in this entire question, this entire problem, this part in bold here, the question statement, gives you the direction that you need in order to be able to solve the question objectively and effectively. Let us have a look at what it reads. In the argument, the journalist is criticized for doing which one of the following? Now, without reading the argument, what I know is that there's an argument here, and this argument criticizes the journalist, right? So the argument does something and it criticizes the journalist, okay? And what you're required to find out in the answer here is what it is criticizing the journalist for, okay? Let us go ahead and see this in some detail now. Let's read this together. It reads, a journalist after lamenting that we cannot know what was in the minds of those who created the 30-year-old cave paintings recently discovered in Madhya Pradesh, praised the beauty and the expressiveness of these paintings and marveled at the ability of these Stone Age artists to share such incredible gifts with us. Long sentence. Now, what do you do with a sentence as long as this? Look, with practice, you come to know as to what the essential parts of the sentence are. Also, when you have a long sentence, you need to break it down into some constituent parts. So what you do is that you first try to remove some of the details that might not be so necessary. And like I said, what is not necessary and what is important is something that you will learn as you practice the questions. So for example, it is highly unlikely with my experience of LSAT India problems that this detail of 30,000-year-old, now this is not so important. You can just say old. I think that should serve our purpose just as well. Okay. Another thing, you can see that there is a pair of commas, one here and the other in here. Okay, so you have this pair of commas here. Now if you see the structure of the sentence, it's kind of like my saying, Ankit, after finishing his breakfast, went to play cricket. Ankit, comma, after finishing his breakfast, comma, went to play cricket. Now if you remove what is in between the commas, what you get is Ankit went to play cricket. And then you get a sentence. Aha, okay, you understood that Ankit went to play cricket. And then you add back what was in the between the commas, which was, oh, Ankit, after finishing his breakfast, went to play cricket. So that way, you split the sentence into smaller parts and then join that back to give yourself the meaning. Let's try doing something similar here. Okay, so there's something here. It says a journalist after doing something then did something else. So let me just, for the time being, strike off the part in between these commas. We'll add that back, but for the time being, let me just strike that off. So I'll take a dark color and let me just strike that out so that we don't pay too much attention to it. Okay, there you go. I am removing this. Okay, it says a journalist praised the beauty and expressiveness. Well, beauty and expressiveness, let's just call it beauty. Okay, let me just say, or let's just say the beauty. Okay, a journalist praised the beauty of these paintings and marveled at the ability of the Stone Age artists to share such incredible gifts with us. So you can just say he kind of praised it. So if you are to even ignore what comes with the and, so let's say you know that it's some additional information. Let me also remove this for the time being. Let's not pay so much attention to it. Okay. Now, what you can see is a very, very simple sentence. It says that a journalist praised the beauty of these paintings. Now let's add back some meaning, add back some sentences. It says, and marveled at the ability. Okay, simple. And then he says, beauty and expressiveness. Okay. And then it says here, after lamenting, let's look at this part that we struck off. It says, after lamenting that we cannot know what was in the minds of those who created the 30,000-year-old paintings recently discovered in Madhya Pradesh. So he praised it, but before praising it, he lamented, which means he expressed sorrow over the fact that, you know what, unfortunately, we cannot know what was in the minds of those who created these old paintings that were recently discovered in Madhya Pradesh. Okay. So what is the journalist doing? The journalist praised the beauty of the art, but before that, lamented that you cannot know what was in the mind of the artists. Let us move ahead. It reads, but if someone can experience the paintings, can share the gifts, which means that these Stone Age artists have shared the gifts. So he says, if someone can experience the paintings, can share the gifts, then how can that person profess ignorance of what is in the artist's minds? It is expressed in the paintings. Now, what is happening here is that, again, let us try to see if we can break the sentence down and get the gist of the sentence if you already haven't. What you find between these hyphens is again a bit of a qualifier, an important one, but let's just remove that for the time being. It says but. Now when something begins with this, then obviously you can see that it is kind of going contrary to what has been said. So you know that when you see this word but, that you are maybe now at the spot where you will be seeing the criticism of the journalist, right? And indeed, it goes on to say, but if someone can experience the painting, then how can that person profess ignorance? Like, how can that person say, hey, I do not know what is in the artist's mind? It is expressed in the paintings. And then you can add this back here, because it's quite clear that if a person can share the gifts, then we know what is in the mind of that person. So the criticism, as you can see here, is that, hey, if you can experience the art, which means that you can see the beauty, you can see the expressiveness, and you can feel that a gift has been shared with you, then you do know the minds of the artist. So essentially, according to the journalist, it cannot be known from the art as to what lies in the mind of the artist, right? So basically, by seeing the painting, you cannot know what lies in the mind of the artist. Now, this is something which has been criticized. The criticism says that the art and the artist are really not so different, because if you can appreciate and understand the painting, then you also have a glimpse into the mind of the artist. Okay, now, when you look at the options, you can see that the criticism here is that he separates what is in the painter's mind from what the painting expresses. So essentially, the criticism is that what is in the mind is what is expressed here. So if you know what is in the painting, you know what is in the head. And this is the criticism. Let us move ahead.